What has happened, everybody? James Hancock here. I'm back to review episode 8 of season 3 of the Orville New Horizons. It's about 1:30 a.m. here in New York when I'm recording this, and I'm getting over a cold. But in spite of my fatigue and my scratchy voice, I'm glad I stayed up for this one because I think for a lot of people, myself included, this is going to go down as one of the special episodes of the Orville. And, you know, if you've been following this channel for a while, every episode I'm always like, oh, that's the greatest episode ever, blah, blah, blah. But what sets this one apart is that it felt like it could be its own feature film, like a standalone story, whether you're talking about the special effects and just the way the episode looked, or the story and the stakes and the consequences. It was a 90-minute episode, and at first I was like, oh, God, this is going to keep me up until like 3 in the morning doing this review. It is a pleasure and a privilege to review an episode as strong as this one, especially one that hit so many different emotional notes, and it really just, this wide spectrum of experiences you can have while watching any film or show, and I was blown away by it overall. I mean, I was laughing with joy when Dolly Parton showed up and was giving some of her Smoky Mountains wisdom and that sort of thing. I was getting chills up and down. I mean, I grew up in a family where people like Dolly Parton and Kenny Rogers were celebrated, and like their song "Island in the Streams" was a big deal for my dad and my sister. But I was also loving just the kick-ass sci-fi. I think it must have been like saving the money from the production budget for this episode alone, because for whatever reason, the Orville was just looking better than it ever has before. The space station where they're docked for the big trials at the end, everything was just looking so slick. And then obviously the emotional story, the story of Topa and Bortus's reaction to when his daughter gets kidnapped. The emotional stakes were very high, and I felt like maybe Bortus had been kind of not been getting the shaft all season, but I've been waiting for a Bortus-focused episode, one that really focused. I mean, obviously, episode 5 dealt with Topa as well, but we really got to see his warrior side in this, which was incredibly satisfying. And so, yeah, all around, this is why people freak out about this show, and this is why people more than ever need to start hopping on social media if they're active on Twitter or wherever, and start using the hashtag #RenewTheOrville, because right now it's by no means a sure thing. And Seth MacFarlane and the cast, they're going to be at San Diego Comic-Con this Saturday, and obviously they'll be banging the drum pretty hard on the show's behalf. But, Disney, they're a big, large, cruel, fucked up corporation which makes a lot of stupid decisions, and they get behind a lot of shows that suck, and they oftentimes cancel shows that deserve to go on. It would not surprise me at all if they continue in their infinite wisdom to get behind a lot of the lackluster programming that we've been seeing on Disney Plus, while neglecting some of the killer programming on Hulu, like the Orville New Horizons. So just to give credit where credit is due, the episode was written by Brandon Braga and Andre Bormanis and was directed by John Cassar. They are very consistent, reliable storytellers with this show. I mean, this exact same creative team did episode 4, Gently Falling Rain. They also did episode 2, Shadow Realms, an episode which I really enjoyed. So yeah, anytime you see these writers and this director teaming up, it's always a good thing. And I have no idea who's directing episodes 9 and 10, nor do I know who's writing them. But I'm getting very sad and depressed knowing that this show is drawing to a close. But let's just enjoy it and savor it while we can, and let's break down what made this episode so special. And for me, maybe the moment where I realized that this episode was really getting to me was what I can only describe as like a classic Jean-Luc Picard moment from the late 80s, early 90s, where I feel like back in like the true heyday of Star Trek Next Generation, every once in a while Patrick Stewart would just kind of give some tough love or some tough wisdom to people who needed to hear it. And as was often the case 30 years ago, and as was the case with this episode, just because someone has the high ground and they're in the right doesn't necessarily make them infallible or incapable of error, which is something we oftentimes lose sight of. And Ed Mercer has this brilliant line where he's giving Havina a bit of a chastising or kind of a stern talking to, and he says, I respect your struggle, I really do, but don't advertise tactical opportunism as pious morality, because that's when you lose me. I love that shit. I feel like a less sophisticated show or a less well-written show would make all the good people always perfectly good and never in the wrong, and all the bad people always bad and always in the wrong. And that's pretty boring drama. The villains, even villains who are like threatening death and torture to children, you have to be able to see something from their point of view in order to make the struggle feel, gritty and intense. Kind of the same way how like a great Star Trek movie like The Undiscovered Country, how you can really see things from the point of view of the Klingons as they're facing like what they regard as the extinction of their species, and how it can drive them to certain acts. So I felt like, the writing on this episode was just top notch. And my only real criticism of this episode, and it's a total superficial criticism, one that's not even really worth mentioning, but I would say that when they were down on the refuge inspecting this colony that's led by Havina, that definitely looked like not a cheap TV set, but a TV set. That was the one part of the episode that did not feel like a feature film. But other than that, this episode gets kind of an A+ across the board, including the opening, which had me absolutely howling. When Topa admits that she has a crush to Kelly, and Kelly is agreeing to talk to her, and Bortus is thrilled. He'd rather be in combat than dealing with relationship issues. And Topa, we finally come to realize she likes Malloy, and she approaches him, and she's asking him out to dinner, and Malloy is being a little slow on the uptake. And when he finally realizes that he's basically being hit on, there's this great bit where Lamar goes, "Yeah, there you go, Sherlock." I just started howling. I mean, it's funny how characters who can be so essential or so central to some of the other episodes can only get like a line or two. And we didn't get a lot of Lamar this episode, but that one beat, that was all we needed. But getting back to the colony, in spite of the art direction being a little subpar, one ingredient that I did like was seeing how these Moclan refugees, how they're so obsessed with Dolly Parton, which obviously pays huge dividends later on. But if you pay careful attention, when they're playing music in the camp, they're playing an instrumental version of Jolene. And if you've never heard Dolly Parton's version of Jolene, go hunt it down. It'll send chills right up and down your spine, which obviously leads to this incredibly moving moment where Havina gets to meet Dolly Parton in the simulator. She walks in, it's this little cabin, and she drops to her knees and just says, "By the gods." And obviously it's an incredibly emotionally moving moment because she's meeting her icon, her hero, but at the same time it's like having this crazy sci-fi alien scenario clashing with the Smoky Mountains and Dolly Parton. It was just so much goddamn fun. And I will say this, Dolly Parton's music blends perfectly with shots of ships in space. They start playing her song Try as we see the Orville taking off. And a lot like the pop music that's used in the Guardians of the Galaxy movies, it's a perfect harmony and they did not clash. But the main drama of this episode is this giant diplomatic crisis which totally explodes when Havina initially asked Topa to help with relaying communications between female Moclans on Moklas who are trying to escape, and they basically need a starship like the Orville in order to pull that off. But then Topa gets kidnapped, and they start beating her and torturing her, trying to figure out who the traitor is on Moklas and how are they communicating, which leads to Kelly and Bortus having this epic team-up where they use their shuttle and they follow the ion trail, the other shuttle, and they find this secret military installation, fight their way in, and save the day. And there are some cool highlights along the way. One great beat, which I loved, was after Bortus and Kelly are jumping across this crevasse and Kelly falls and jacks up her shoulder and he comes down to help her. They had this kind of pregnant pause moment where they're sharing a look and he's acknowledging how, in a lot of ways, she feels like a part of their family. And I was like, are they about to fucking hook up in the middle of this mission? It really felt like they were about to just wrap their lips around each other, but the moment passed, and obviously now at the end of the episode with the return of Clyden, that's probably not going to happen, but for a second there, it felt like, yeah, Kelly and Bortus just might get it on. And for folks who like a little violence in their sci-fi, I guess if you wanted to be totally ruthless in your analysis of the Orville, it'd be fair to say that on the whole, shootouts on this show definitely feel like something more from television as opposed to like a John Woo movie or a Sam Peckinpah film. But when Bortus finally gets to meet the torturer, this one-eyed guy who's been just beating the hell out of Topa, Bortus gets the best kind of revenge where he takes the torture device and shoves it into the guy's one good eye. And I was like, all right, that's a little bit of savagery. So yeah, this show typically doesn't really get all that savage, but that was a very satisfying moment, especially for fans of Bortus, which I am. And another satisfying scene was when during one of these endless negotiations and trials and sit down where the Mocklins are always acting like the injured party, no matter how unaccommodating or how self-righteous they're being. Finally, Malloy just stands up, calls them on their bullshit. And it was just great getting to see Malloy stand up for a character who he regards basically now as a little sister. But as we see, in spite of everything kind of working out in the end and the colony getting to become like their own sovereign nation and Topa gets reunited with her family, militarily, this episode had major long-term consequences because now the Mocklins have been tossed out of the Union. They didn't leave the Union. They were voted and expelled out of the Union, which militarily just is going to wreak havoc on their ability to fight the Kalons. And so I love how this show is willing to upset the status quo. As I've mentioned in reviews of other shows like The Boys in the past, I love it when a show is willing to shuffle the deck and make radical changes that where the future is by no means certain, as opposed to other shows like take your average Star Wars show, where oftentimes they're going back in time to they're in a little box where they can't really do all that much. Like, Darth Vader's not going to get killed in the Obi-Wan Kenobi show because he's going to have to be there for the subsequent movies and so on and so forth. But we really have no idea what's going to come next. And that makes the show exciting. It makes it unpredictable. And the future is this great big unknown. But as Dolly Parton says earlier in the episode, what was her advice? If you do the right thing in the here and now, the future has a way of taking care of itself. So let's hope that the great Dolly Parton's wisdom regarding the here and now holds true for this fictional setting. I hope that season 3 won't end with some apocalyptic scenario where the Kalons take everybody out, and that ends up being the last episode ever where we're always kind of left wondering what might have been. But I have a feeling the next 2 episodes potentially could be really fucking grim. In any event, I think a lot of people are going to completely freak out over this episode in the best possible way. It's just so satisfying when you see a character like Bordas, who's so kind of serious and buttoned up, really getting to cut loose, like when he's at that trial and he's pointing a finger and he's demanding that these individuals have to answer for their crimes. It's some good dripping melodrama, and it's always nice when an episode of TV gives you like a full meal where, like I said earlier, just this full spectrum of different emotions and experiences and sensations. And this is one of those episodes that had a little bit of everything. It had laughs, it had violence, it had great music. It just, this episode fucking rocks. So high five to the cast and crew of the Orville. Once again, they prove that this is one of the best shows out there, and sadly it's a show that just I feel like never gets the love and attention and support that it deserves, but it is always my pleasure to sing its praises here on this channel. So I hope you enjoyed this reaction and review. If you did, please consider liking the video, subscribing to the channel, hitting that notification bell, and if you want to lend me some support, go to manscaped.com. They are my official sponsor, and use the discount code WRONGREEL in all caps. That'll get you 20% off any purchase, as well as free shipping and handling. It is the summer beach season, pool season, etc. Everybody wants to look good. So if you want to look good from the waist down, the Performance Package 4.0 over at manscaped.com gets my highest possible recommendation. But thanks so much for putting up with my kind of sick, weak and weary voice, and hope you enjoyed this review. But more importantly, as always, onwards and upwards.